Men are walking away from society and women, and society will never recover from it. Imagine waking up one day to a world where the natural order has been flipped upside down and the very foundation that held society together for generations begins to crumble, not with a loud explosion, but with a quiet, steady withdrawal. Men around the globe are choosing a different path, stepping back from the roles they once carried without question and focusing instead on their own peace, their own strength, and their own future. This is not some temporary trend or passing phase. It is a profound shift that has been building for decades, and it is accelerating right now in plain sight. What happens when the protectors, providers, and builders decide they have had enough of being punished for simply existing? Stay with me through this entire discussion, because by the end, you will see exactly why this movement cannot be stopped and why the consequences are already reshaping entire nations in ways that no amount of denial can reverse. If you are enjoying these angry guy videos and you want to show some real support, grab me a Red Bull using the link right there in the video description. It helps keep the content coming straight and unfiltered. Society will never recover from men walking away, and that statement is not exaggeration or hype. It is the cold, observable reality unfolding across continents. Globally, men are walking away from traditional expectations, from endless responsibilities that once defined their worth, and from relationships that have grown increasingly one sided. Instead, they are choosing to focus on themselves, their own well being, their own goals, and the simple satisfactions that actually bring lasting peace. Look at Japan, where more than 60% of men now identify as herbivore men. These are men who have no interest in pursuing romantic relationships, dating, or even physical intimacy with women. They represent a major turning point that started decades ago and is now spreading far beyond Japanese borders. Think about what that number really means. More than half of the young men in one of the most advanced economies on earth have essentially closed the door on the old script that told them their primary purpose was to chase marriage, family, and constant provision. They are not angry rebels making noise in the streets. They are quiet, deliberate, and resolved. They wake up each day and direct their energy toward hobbies, personal growth, financial stability, and self respect, rather than pouring it into a system that repeatedly demonstrated contempt for their efforts. This is a crisis that touches economics, demographics, and the basic social fabric all at once. Rural towns in Japan are emptying out not because of war or natural disaster, but because fewer children are being born, and the young people who remain see no reason to follow the old path. Entire villages that once thrived with generations living close together now consist mainly of elderly residents whose numbers dwindle year after year, with no new families moving in to replace them. The birth rate in Japan sits among the lowest in the world, and that is not an accident of economics alone. It reflects a deeper withdrawal by men who have decided the costs outweigh any promised rewards. Caregivers in their 70s are now looking after parents in their 90s because there simply are not enough younger adults to share the load. Hospitals and nursing facilities strain under the weight of a rapidly aging population while the working age group shrinks. This creates a feedback loop that gets tighter every year. Fewer births mean fewer future workers, fewer taxpayers, and less support for the very programs designed to care for the elderly. Yet, in the middle of this slow motion, unraveling, many women respond, not with reflection or humility, but with open mockery of the men who have chosen to step away. Consider the herbivore men again. They are not hiding in shame or suffering in silence, as some narratives suggest. Many live content lives centered on personal interests such as reading, gaming, fitness, creative pursuits, or simply enjoying solitude without the pressure of constant performance for someone else. They have observed the pattern over decades and drawn a logical conclusion. The traditional bargain no longer holds. When society spent 50 years telling men they were toxic for their natural traits, when courts were weaponized to extract resources long after relationships ended, and when public shaming became a casual sport, the predictable outcome was withdrawal. Men listened, they learned, and they acted in the only way that preserved their dignity. Women who once pushed hard for independence and equality now face the downstream results of those same ideas taken to their extremes. Many silently grieve the absence of committed partners, while others lash out with ridicule because the fear of permanent solitude feels too heavy to acknowledge openly. They wanted men to step back and stop approaching. They wanted to remove traditional expectations. Now that men have done exactly that, the landscape looks very different. Cities that once buzzed with young families show more single households and empty playgrounds. Government campaigns encourage dating and marriage, yet the numbers continue to decline because the underlying trust has eroded. This is not limited to Japan, though the situation there serves as a clear early warning visible for anyone willing to look without filters. Similar patterns appear in South Korea, where intense work culture and high living costs combine with shifting attitudes toward relationships. Young men there increasingly opt out of the relentless pressure to overachieve solely to attract a partner who may still hold unrealistic standards. In Western nations, the data tells its own story through rising male celibacy rates, declining marriage numbers and surveys, showing large portions of young men reporting no interest in pursuing long term commitments. They cite repeated experiences of being used for resources, attention, or status only to face criticism when they set boundaries. Let us slow down and examine how this withdrawal actually unfolds in a man's daily life, because the real power lies in the small, consistent choices rather than grand declarations. Picture a man in his late 20s or early 30s who once followed the expected route. He worked long hours, chased promotions, dated with the hope of building something stable, and sacrificed personal time thinking it would lead to mutual respect and partnership. Over time, he noticed the pattern: dates that felt more like interviews or transactions, conversations that quickly turned to what he could provide rather than who he actually was, public discourse that painted masculinity itself as problematic, legal systems that tilted heavily in one direction during disputes. After enough cycles of this, he begins to question the entire framework. Instead of continuing to invest in a game where the rules change mid play, he redirects that energy inward. He streamlines his living space, removing clutter and unnecessary expenses. He invests time in skills that improve his own capabilities, whether physical, mental, or financial. He cultivates hobbies that bring genuine satisfaction without requiring approval from others. His social circle may shrink, but the connections that remain are based on mutual respect rather than obligation. Sleep improves because there are no late night arguments or anxiety over unspoken expectations. Money stays in his own accounts rather than flowing out to cover expenses that never quite balanced. Peace settles in not as emptiness, but as freedom from constant negotiation. This is the herbivore mindset in action. Even if the label does not always apply directly, it is minimalist by nature because men have always had a capacity to focus on essentials once the distractions are stripped away. They remove what does not serve them and protect what does. In Japan, this shows up in men who prefer part time or flexible work that leaves room for personal interests instead of grinding as salarymen with little personal life. They spend on grooming fashion or hobbies that make them feel good without tying their worth to providing for a household. They form casual friendships sometimes with women, but without the pressure of romance or a long term commitment. The old aggressive pursuit of status symbols to impress potential partners fades because the payoff no longer justifies the cost. Society once relied on men to stand between harsh realities and the more vulnerable. That protective role was taken for granted for generations. Men worked dangerous jobs, built infrastructure, defended borders, and maintained order, often at great personal risk. In return, they received respect, stability, and a sense of purpose tied to family and community. When that respect eroded and the stability turned into liability, many men reevaluated. They realized they could protect themselves first and live with far less external chaos. The days of automatic sacrifice are ending, and that change ripples outward. Women were never designed to navigate the full weight of modern life without the complementary strengths men historically brought. That is not an insult to female capability. It is a recognition of basic differences that evolved over thousands of years for survival and flourishing. When those differences are denied or punished, the system becomes unbalanced. Women today face rising costs of living alone, shrinking social networks, and the biological clock that does not pause for career milestones. Many express frustration in online spaces about the difficulty of finding reliable partners, yet continue patterns that discourage the very traits that once made men willing to commit. Some women openly demand that men return to dating, paying for experiences, and providing financial support as if the past decades of criticism never happened. They post videos describing how impossible survival feels without male contribution. They link cash applications in bios, expecting casual transfers. They create groups to share warnings about men they dated, turning personal stories into public judgment. These behaviors only reinforce the decision many men have already made. Pattern recognition kicks in strongly once a man has seen the same cycle repeat. Words lose power when actions tell a different story. Men who walk away discover something profound. Being alone does not equal feeling lonely. Once they make peace with their own company and accept themselves without needing external validation, the shallowness of many modern interactions becomes obvious. Relationships that once seemed essential start to look like high maintenance arrangements with uneven returns. The woman who declares she is the table and her presence alone should suffice finds that men no longer line up to prove their worth at that table. Instead, they build their own solid foundation and enjoy the view from there. This shift brings tangible benefits that accumulate over time. Health improves when stress from unbalanced dynamics decreases. Financial security grows when resources stay under personal control. Creativity and focus sharpen because energy is not scattered across endless obligations. Many men report higher life satisfaction after they stopped chasing validation through relationships that demanded constant performance. They travel light, pursue passions, and maintain clear boundaries. Luxury for them is not flashy displays, but the quiet comfort of a life aligned with their nature. Japan offers the clearest laboratory for observing these changes because the trends started earlier and the data is more openly tracked. The term herbivore men entered mainstream conversation around 2009, but the behaviors had been building since the economic bubble burst in the early 1990s. Young men watched their fathers grind through long hours with little personal reward only to face divorce or dissatisfaction at home. They saw salaryman culture demand total loyalty to the company while personal fulfillment took a back seat. When alternative paths appeared through technology, consumerism, and changing cultural influences, many chose them. Surveys from that period revealed striking numbers. Large percentages of men in their 20s and 30s reported little desire to pursue aggressive romantic strategies. They preferred friendships or solitude over the high pressure pursuit that often ended in rejection or short lived arrangements. Some embraced more androgynous styles influenced by fashion media and entertainment that blurred traditional lines. Others simply lowered their investment in the mating market altogether, focusing instead on self improvement or low stress careers. The result was a measurable drop in marriage rates and birth numbers that continues to accelerate. Rural areas feel the impact first and hardest. Towns that once supported vibrant communities now struggle with boarded shops, declining schools, and aging infrastructure. Young people migrate to cities for opportunities, but even there, many men opt out of family formation. The elderly population grows while the support base shrinks, creating the caregiver crisis, where 70-year-olds care for 90-year-olds with limited help. This is not sustainable. And every policy attempt to reverse it through incentives or dating programs has shown limited success because the underlying trust and motivation are missing. Men in this situation are not looking back with regret. They have accepted the new reality and adapted. They focus on what they can control: their health, their finances, their peace of mind. Some maintain minimal interactions with women on their own terms without commitment. Others prefer complete independence. The common thread is the refusal to return to the old contract that proved costly and thankless. This is rational decision making, not laziness or failure. It is pattern recognition applied to life. The mockery that sometimes comes from women who remain invested in the old script reveals more about their own insecurity than about the men themselves. Deep down, many understand that permanent solitude without family or community support carries heavy, long term costs. Humans are social by nature, and women in particular historically thrived within networks of family and mutual support. When those networks fray and men are no longer willing to rebuild them, the isolation becomes palpable. Some respond with anger because acceptance would require acknowledging their role in creating the conditions for withdrawal. Feminism as a broad movement spent decades reframing male traits as toxic and male contributions as suspect. Terms like manspreading turned natural posture into public offense. Media narratives highlighted every flaw while downplaying strengths. Family courts and divorce proceedings often left men financially drained, even when they had done everything right. Public shaming through videos posted online became a casual way to enforce new social rules. Paternity issues were minimized or treated lightly, while expectations on men remained high. Over time, these pressures accumulated like small cuts that eventually make a man step back to stop the bleeding. Men learned from these experiences. They saw how quickly respect could vanish and how easily resources could be redirected away from them. They noticed that genuine partnership was increasingly replaced by transactional dynamics where their role was primarily to provide while their needs were sidelined. Once that realization settles and the motivation to participate fades, why invest heavily in a system designed to extract rather than reciprocate? The logical response is to conserve energy and redirect it towards self preservation. This does not mean men become hermits or stop contributing to society entirely. Many continue working, building careers, and creating value, but they do so on terms that protect their own interests first. They avoid legal traps that could wipe out years of effort. They maintain distance from dynamics that drain rather than energize. They enjoy their freedom without guilt because they have already paid the price of past expectations. The minimalist lifestyle many adopt is not deprivation, it is clarity. Removing what is unnecessary leaves room for what truly matters. Stories from men who have walked this path often follow a similar arc. There is the period of frustration and confusion where they try harder to meet expectations only to face the same criticisms. Then comes the turning point, usually after a particularly clear example of imbalance, whether personal or observed in friends. Reflection follows, and with it, the decision to change course. They study their own patterns, read about male psychology, examine relationship data, and gradually build a new framework. Over months and years, the anger subsides and is replaced by calm determination. Life becomes lighter and more authentic. In Japan, this process has been visible for longer, so the outcomes are more pronounced. Herbivore men are not a monolith. Some enjoy fashion and grooming as forms of self expression. Others immerse in hobbies like gaming or collecting. Many simply value their independence above the risks of modern dating. They form loose communities online or in shared interest spaces where judgment is low and mutual understanding is high. They are not broken or defeated. They are adapted. The broader societal cost is real and growing. Economies depend on stable populations and productive workforces. When birth rates stay below replacement levels for decades, the math becomes unforgiving. Pension systems strain. Healthcare demands rise while the number of contributors falls. Innovation and economic growth slow when the energy and risk taking that young men historically brought diminish. Governments respond with campaigns and subsidies, but these treat symptoms rather than the root cause of eroded trust and misaligned incentives. Women who once celebrated independence now encounter the practical limits of going it alone in a high cost world. Housing expenses multiply for single occupants. Career demands leave less room for child rearing, even if desire remains. Social circles shrink when peers pair off or move away. The biological reality of fertility windows adds pressure that no policy can fully erase. Some respond by doubling down on criticism of men, hoping shame will bring them back. Others quietly adjust expectations, but the window for easy reversal has narrowed. Men who have found peace in walking away rarely reverse course because the benefits are immediate and compounding. They sleep better, eat better, move better, and think clearer when not navigating constant emotional labor. Their finances stabilize when they stop funding unbalanced arrangements. Their self respect strengthens when they no longer tolerate disrespect disguised as empowerment. This is not hatred or revenge, it is self preservation practiced at scale. The mouse utopia experiments from decades ago offer an interesting parallel, even if the comparison is not perfect. In controlled environments with abundant resources and no predators, populations exploded, then collapsed as social behaviors broke down. Successful males withdrew into narcissistic grooming while others turned aggressive or apathetic. Reproduction dropped and the colony spiraled. Observers have drawn loose analogies to modern societies where comfort and safety coincide with declining motivation for traditional roles. When the struggle that once forged character is removed and replaced with constant criticism, the withdrawal makes sense. In human terms, the abundance of modern life combined with relentless messaging that male nature is problematic creates similar dynamics. Men who once competed fiercely for status and provision now see less reason to do so when the rewards are uncertain and the penalties are high. They groom themselves for their own satisfaction. They pursue interests that fulfill them directly. They avoid the arena where the rules favor extraction over cooperation. The result looks like apathy to outsiders, but feels like liberation to those inside it. Japan continues to serve as the leading indicator. Its population decline set new records with hundreds of thousands more deaths than births in recent years. Rural extinction is no longer theoretical. Care facilities innovate to handle elderly patients with fewer staff. Businesses pivot from baby products to adult care items, recognizing where demand lies. Immigration is discussed as a partial solution, but cultural resistance and scale make it insufficient alone. The core issue remains the low desire for family formation among the native population, especially among men. Men walking away are thriving in their chosen lanes. They keep resources close build skills that serve them directly and enjoy the absence of drama that once filled their days. They recognize that observable reality trumps promises or social pressure. They trust their own eyes and experiences over narratives designed to pull them back into unbalanced roles. This clarity is hard won, but once achieved, it is difficult to surrender. The women who mock or demand a return often do so from a place of discomfort with the new landscape. They wanted equality without the corresponding responsibilities. They wanted freedom without the loneliness that can accompany it. Now they face the consequences of 50 years of pushing against natural complementarity. The cost of living feels unbearable without dual incomes or male provision. Communities weaken without the stabilizing presence of committed families. The future looks uncertain, and that uncertainty breeds frustration. Yet men are not coming back on the old terms. They have seen too much and learned too well. The game as it was structured is over, and a new equilibrium is forming. Some relationships will still happen, but they will be on foundations of genuine mutual respect rather than obligation or guilt. Those will be rarer and more intentional. The majority of energy that once flowed into traditional structures now stays with the individual man building his own life. This is the story playing out quietly but powerfully across many societies. It is not loud protest or organized movement in most cases. It is millions of individual decisions adding up to a seismic shift. Each man who chooses peace over pressure, each one who redirects resources to self improvement, each one who refuses to participate in dynamics that devalue him, contributes to the larger picture. Society may never fully recover in the form it once had, but new forms will emerge built on clearer boundaries and realistic expectations. The intensity of this change can feel overwhelming when viewed at scale. Entire nations face demographic winters. Economies must adapt to smaller, younger cohorts. Cultural narratives struggle to keep pace with behavior on the ground. Yet for the individual man who has walked away, the experience is often one of relief and rediscovery. He finds parts of himself that were buried under layers of expectation. He builds routines that nourish rather than deplete. He faces the world with calmer eyes because the internal conflict has quieted. Japan, with its advanced economy and detailed data, offers the most visible case study, but the underlying dynamics travel. Men in different cultures face similar pressures translated into local contexts. Work demands that leave little room for personal life. Social messages that frame traditional masculinity as suspect. Legal and financial risks that outweigh potential rewards. Once enough men connect the dots, the withdrawal accelerates because the alternative has been tested and found wanting. Women who truly want partnership will need to confront the role their collective choices played in reaching this point. Humility and self reflection are difficult but necessary if any reconnection is to occur on healthy terms. Mockery and demands only push men further away, confirming their decision. The ones who adapt and show genuine respect may find willing partners among men who still value connection, but only when it is reciprocal and drama free. For now, the momentum remains with men focusing inward. They are not waiting for permission or approval. They are living according to their updated understanding of reality. This is the core of the herbivore phenomenon and the larger men walking away trend. It is rational, calculated, and increasingly widespread. The consequences will unfold over decades, but the direction is set. As we continue exploring this topic, it becomes clear that the withdrawal is not a rejection of all responsibility, but a selective one. Men still contribute through work innovation and personal excellence. They simply stopped volunteering for roles that came with high risk and low appreciation. They protect their time, energy, and resources like the valuable assets they are. This recalibration affects everything from dating markets to labor participation to long term planning. Rural Japan shows the human face of these changes. Towns where schools once overflowed with children now stand quiet. Shops close as customer bases shrink. Elderly residents support each other as best they can, But the strain shows. Young men who might have stayed and built families instead pursue independent paths in cities or online spaces. The cycle reinforces itself. Fewer families mean fewer reasons for infrastructure investment, which in turn makes staying less attractive. In urban centers, the story is different but related. High rise apartments house more single occupants. Dating apps see skewed engagement, with many men stepping back from active pursuit. Social events reflect changing priorities, with more focus on personal hobbies than couple oriented activities. The visible vibrancy of youth culture masks the underlying demographic slowdown. Men who embrace this path often describe a sense of coming home to themselves. After years of performing, they drop the mask and breathe easier. They discover that self acceptance is not narcissism, but foundation. From that foundation, they build without the fear of sudden withdrawal of support or respect. Their happiness is no longer contingent on someone else's approval. This does not mean they live without challenges. Life always brings difficulties, but they face them with full ownership rather than diffused responsibility. They choose their battles and conserve strength for what matters to them. The peace they find is authentic because it is internally generated. The global spread of these attitudes suggests deep structural issues rather than isolated cultural quirks. Economic pressures play a role, but they do not explain everything. Cultural messaging, legal biases, and shifting social norms all contribute. When men consistently experience the same patterns across borders, the common factors become hard to dismiss. Women who feel the impact most acutely are often those who delayed family formation for career or personal exploration, only to find the pool of willing, committed partners has diminished. The biological reality adds urgency that society is only beginning to acknowledge openly. Some respond with innovation, creating new social spaces or adjusting expectations. Others cling to old narratives, hoping external pressure will restore the balance. Men have already moved on. They are not looking for restoration of the old system. They are building lives that work for them in the current environment. This is the new baseline, and it will shape the coming decades. The intensity of the original push against traditional male roles has created an equally strong counter response in the form of quiet disengagement. Men did not organize marches or issue manifestos in most cases. They simply stopped participating at the previous level. The aggregate effect is what we see today in population statistics, relationship trends, and shifting cultural priorities. Japan stands as both warning and example. Its advanced status makes the trends measurable and visible. Other nations watching closely can see their own future if similar attitudes take root. The question is not whether change is happening, but how societies will adapt to it. For the men involved, the adaptation is already underway. They focus on self well being because that is what remains reliable. They enjoy simple luxuries of time and autonomy. They rediscover the satisfaction of competence in areas they choose. The minimalist approach serves them well because it cuts through noise and leaves clarity. This is the story of men walking away, told through the lens of real outcomes and lived experience. It is not abstract theory, but observable in daily life across many countries. The herbivore men of Japan represent one visible expression of a larger phenomenon that continues to grow. As we delve deeper, the personal stories add color to the statistics. Men who once felt trapped in cycles of expectation now describe freedom that surprised them. They talk about mornings without dread, evenings without conflict, and futures they control. The relief is palpable even when they speak with measured words. Women who witness this shift sometimes express confusion or resentment because the script they learned no longer matches reality. They were told men would always pursue, always provide, always return. When that assumption breaks, the adjustment is difficult. Some make it, others do not. The ones who do often discover that respectful reciprocal relationships can still form, but only when both sides drop the old power games. Those relationships look different, calmer, more intentional, and built on clear boundaries. They are possible, but they require honesty that was missing for a long time. For most men in the withdrawal phase, the focus remains personal. They are not waiting for society to catch up. They are living their lives and letting the results speak. This steady, consistent approach has more power than loud protest because it cannot be easily dismissed or argued away. The demographic data continues to confirm the trend. Birth rates stay low, marriage rates decline, single person households increase. These are not temporary fluctuations, but sustained patterns rooted in changed behavior by men. Governments respond with various measures from financial incentives to public awareness campaigns. Results remain modest because incentives do not address the core issues of trust and perceived fairness. Until those are restored or replaced with new equilibria, the numbers are unlikely to reverse dramatically. Men who have found their peace are unlikely to trade it for uncertain promises. They have seen the pattern and adjusted accordingly. Their pattern recognition serves them well, protecting them from repeating past mistakes. This brings us to a central truth. Men walking away is not the end of the world, but it is the end of an era. The old assumptions about automatic male participation no longer hold. New realities are forming, and individuals are navigating them in real time. The intensity with which society once demanded male sacrifice has been replaced by a vacuum that men are filling with self-directed purpose. That shift carries consequences, but also opportunities for those willing to adapt. Japan, with its herbivore men, its aging population, and its quiet rural decline, shows one possible future. Other nations may follow similar paths or find different adaptations. The common thread is the male withdrawal that started the chain reaction. As this discussion continues, we will explore more aspects of how this unfolds, the personal benefits, the societal costs, and the long-term outlook. The picture is complex, but the direction is clear. Men have chosen a new path, and they are walking it with determination. The early signs were subtle: declining interest in traditional dating, rising focus on personal hobbies, quiet conversations among friends about the costs versus rewards. Over time, these small choices scaled into measurable trends. Surveys captured the shift. Media attempted to explain it, but the core remained the same: men deciding they had enough. In Japan, the economic recession of the 90s accelerated the process. Young men saw limited upside in the salaryman life their fathers endured. They sought alternatives that preserved dignity and offered balance. Some found them in creative fields, part-time work, or self-employment. Others simply reduced their overall ambition in the public sphere, choosing contentment over status. The herbivore label captured this change, but it also carried stigma. Critics portrayed these men as weak or irresponsible, ignoring the rational calculations behind their choices. The men themselves often ignored the label and continued living on their terms. They were not seeking validation from critics, they were seeking peace. This pattern repeats in different forms elsewhere. Men reduce dating effort when experiences turn negative. They prioritize fitness or skills that benefit them directly. They build financial cushions that provide security without reliance on dual income assumptions. Each step reinforces the next. The result is a generation of men who are more self-contained than their predecessors. They need less external approval. They tolerate less nonsense. They value their time highly because they have reclaimed it. Women who encounter this new reality sometimes feel blindsided. They grew up with narratives that place them at the center of male attention and effort. When that attention withdraws, the adjustment requires honest self-examination. Those who undertake it may find new ways to connect. Those who do not remain frustrated. The broader culture struggles to integrate these changes. Narratives that worked in previous decades lose relevance. Institutions built on old assumptions face pressure. Adaptation is slow because admitting the scale of the shift feels uncomfortable. Yet the data does not lie. Population figures, relationship statistics, and self reported satisfaction levels all point in the same direction. Men are walking away, and the world is changing because of it. This is not a call for panic, but for clear eyed recognition. Understanding the causes and effects allows better navigation of the new landscape. For men, it validates their choices. For women, it highlights areas for reflection. For society, it signals the need for honest conversation rather than denial. The herbivore men of Japan were among the first to walk this path in large numbers. Their experience offers lessons that extend far beyond their borders. They showed that opting out is possible, that peace can be found in simplicity, and that self focus is not selfishness when it restores balance. As more men follow similar paths, the cumulative effect grows. Economies adapt, cultures shift, individuals find their footing in the new order. The process is ongoing and far from finished. The intensity of the original imbalances created the conditions for this response. Decades of messaging that framed men as the problem rather than essential partners set the stage. When respect disappeared and extraction increased, the logical outcome was disengagement. Men learned to trust observable reality over words. They saw the patterns in relationships, courts, and public discourse. They adjusted their behavior accordingly, and the adjustment stuck because it worked. Today, those men live with greater clarity. They pursue what brings them satisfaction. They avoid what drains them. They maintain boundaries that protect their well being. This is the new normal for a growing number. Society will feel the effects for generations. The question is how it will respond, with understanding or with continued resistance. The men have already chosen their direction. They are walking away, and they are not looking back. Picture a young man in Tokyo finishing his modest workday and heading home to a small but orderly apartment. He prepares a simple meal, opens a book or turns on a game that interests him, and spends the evening without the weight of someone else's expectations hanging over him. No arguments about priorities. No pressure to prove his value through constant provision. No unspoken scorecard keeping track of who did more. He sleeps soundly because his mind is not replaying conversations or worrying about tomorrow's demands. This scene repeats in countless variations across Japan and beyond, and it reveals the heart of what men walking away actually looks like in practice. These men are not disappearing from life. They are reappearing in spaces that serve them directly. Some join local fitness groups where the focus stays on personal progress rather than social performance. Others dedicate time to learning new skills through online courses or hands on projects that bring measurable satisfaction when completed. They curate their environments carefully, choosing possessions that add value rather than clutter. Their finances reflect the same care, with steady contributions to savings or investments that grow without being diverted into lifestyles built around someone else's approval. Over months and years, this consistent approach creates stability that feels earned and secure. The contrast with previous generations becomes stark when you listen to the stories they share in private conversations or anonymous forums. Fathers and grandfathers often speak of lifelong sacrifice with a mixture of pride and quiet exhaustion. They worked the long hours, accepted the transfers, and carried the family through every challenge because that was the expected role. Many now watch their sons or younger relatives choose differently, and feel a complicated mix of concern and understanding. The older men remember the respect that once accompanied those sacrifices. The younger men see a world where that respect has been replaced by suspicion and legal vulnerability. The gap in perspective is wide, yet both sides recognize that something fundamental has shifted in how society values male effort. In South Korea, the pressures take a slightly different shape but lead to similar outcomes. Intense academic and career competition leaves young people with little room for personal balance. Men in their 20s and 30s increasingly step back from the expectation that they must become perfect providers before they can even consider forming a family. Living costs in major cities continue to climb, while wages for entry level positions struggle to keep pace. Rather than doubling down on the grind, many men choose moderate career paths that leave energy for their own interests. They invest in personal development, physical health, and hobbies that restore rather than deplete them. Marriage rates drop further each year, and the government responds with incentives that have yet to reverse the trend in any meaningful way. What stands out in these stories is the absence of dramatic rebellion. There are no mass protests or public manifestos in most cases. The change spreads through individual calculations made behind closed doors after enough disappointing experiences accumulate. A man tries the traditional route, encounters repeated imbalance, reflects on the pattern, and gradually reduces his investment. He stops initiating contact that leads nowhere. He redirects his resources toward goals that return direct benefits. He learns to enjoy his own company without needing to fill every silence with someone else's presence. The peace that follows is not emptiness, it is space for genuine self discovery. This rediscovery often surprises the men themselves. Many describe realizing they had spent years shaping their behavior around external judgments rather than internal standards. Once they drop that filter, they notice preferences they had ignored. One man might develop a serious interest in photography and spend weekends exploring quiet neighborhoods with his camera. Another might focus on strength training and nutrition, watching his body and confidence transform over consistent months. Others dive into reading history, philosophy, or technical subjects that expand their thinking without requiring approval. The common thread is the freedom to pursue these interests without justifying them to a partner who might dismiss them as unimportant. Economically, the effects compound in ways that policymakers are only beginning to measure. When large numbers of men reduce their participation in the high pressure provider role, consumer patterns change. Luxury goods marketed toward traditional family units see slower growth. Housing markets adjust as more people choose smaller single occupancy units over larger family homes. Savings rates among working age men often rise because resources stay under personal control rather than flowing into shared expenses that carry legal risks. Businesses that once relied on steady family formation shift their focus toward products and services for independent adults. The entire economic machine, built on assumptions of continuous population growth and dual income households, begins to recalibrate. Japan faces particularly sharp versions of these adjustments. Entire industries tied to child rearing and family life have contracted, while sectors serving older adults expand rapidly. Companies that produce baby formula and children's clothing now pivot toward nutritional supplements and mobility aids for the elderly. Real estate developers build more compact, efficient apartments rather than spacious family dwellings. The labor market shows shortages in care professions because fewer young people enter the workforce to replace retirees. Training programs struggle to attract enough candidates while the demand for caregivers grows every year. These are not abstract projections. They are daily realities in hospitals, nursing facilities, and rural communities where the average age keeps climbing. The human side of this demographic pressure reveals itself in quiet moments that rarely make headlines. An elderly woman in a small village prepares meals for herself and her husband, both in their late 80s. She moves more slowly each season, yet continues because no younger relatives live nearby to help. In the next town over, a 72-year-old man visits his 94-year-old mother daily to assist with basic tasks because professional care options remain limited and expensive. These scenes repeat across regions where birth rates stayed below replacement for decades. The emotional weight is heavy, yet the conversation in mainstream spaces often avoids connecting the dots back to the earlier withdrawal of men from family formation. Men who have stepped away from that path do not celebrate the difficulties others face. Many simply note that they saw the patterns early and chose self preservation before the cost became unbearable. They understand that biology and time move in one direction. They recognize that building a stable life takes consistent effort that cannot be outsourced or delayed indefinitely. By focusing on their own foundation first, they avoid becoming part of the strain on already stretched systems. Their choice is not indifference. It is clarity about what they can realistically control and what they cannot. Cultural attitudes toward masculinity play a significant role in accelerating this shift. In many societies, messages that once celebrated male strength, resilience, and provision have been replaced by narratives that treat those same traits with suspicion. Boys grow up hearing that their natural energy is problematic. Young men encounter workplaces and social environments where expressing traditional competence can be reframed as dominance. Media stories highlight negative examples while downplaying the quiet contributions that keep infrastructure running and services functioning. Over time, this steady drumbeat creates distance between men and the institutions that once gave them purpose. The response is not usually open defiance, it is measured withdrawal. Men continue working and contributing, but they set firmer boundaries around their time and emotional energy. They participate less in voluntary roles that expose them to risk without corresponding respect. They build private lives that feel authentic rather than performative. This boundary setting spreads quietly through personal example and shared observations. One man shares how he stopped overextending at work after watching colleagues face sudden professional or personal setbacks. Another describes reducing his social media presence after seeing how quickly private matters became public ammunition. Each small adjustment reinforces the larger pattern. In Western countries, the same dynamics appear through different cultural lenses. Surveys consistently show rising percentages of young men reporting low interest in serious relationships or marriage. They cite concerns about financial vulnerability in family court systems, shifting cultural expectations, and repeated experiences where efforts were met with criticism rather than appreciation. Dating platforms reflect this imbalance, with men reporting lower response rates and higher rates of casual interactions that rarely develop further. Many men respond by focusing intensely on career skills, physical fitness, or creative pursuits that provide clear feedback and personal reward. The result is a generation that appears successful on the surface, yet opts out of traditional milestones at higher rates than previous cohorts. Stories from these men often follow a recognizable arc, even when the details differ. There is the initial period of trying to meet every expectation. Dates are planned carefully. Conversations aim to show stability and kindness. Effort is invested in building something meaningful. Then come the moments of imbalance, requests for financial help early on, sudden changes in tone when boundaries are set, public narratives that frame men as the default problem. After enough cycles, the internal calculator shifts. The man realizes the energy required exceeds the likely return. He begins conserving that energy for areas that actually improve his own life. The relief that follows confirms the decision was sound. This is not a temporary phase for most. Once the pattern is recognized and the benefits of independence are experienced, the motivation to return to the old dynamic weakens considerably. Men discover they can maintain healthy friendships and professional relationships without tying their core well being to romantic validation. They learn to enjoy solitude without mistaking it for loneliness. They build routines that support long term health rather than short term performance. The minimalist mindset helps here because it naturally eliminates what no longer serves while protecting what does. Possessions are chosen for utility and joy rather than status signaling. Time is guarded because it is the one resource that cannot be replenished. The global nature of this trend becomes clearer when you compare data across regions. Japan and South Korea show some of the most advanced expressions due to cultural and economic factors that accelerated the process. Similar patterns appear in parts of Europe where marriage and birth rates have declined steadily for years. In North America, self reported data from young men indicates growing comfort with single life and reduced pressure to pursue traditional provider roles. Technology plays a role by giving men more options for connection, entertainment, and skill development without needing to leave their own space. Online communities allow sharing of experiences that once remained private. Pattern recognition spreads faster when information flows without gatekeepers. Women who observe these changes from the outside sometimes express genuine confusion. They grew up with the assumption that men would always compete for their attention and commitment. When that competition slows or stops, the landscape feels unfamiliar. Some respond by working harder to stand out in the dating market. Others direct frustration toward the men who have stepped back. A smaller group takes time for honest reflection and adjusts their own approach to emphasize mutual respect and clear expectations. The outcomes vary, but the underlying reality remains the same. Large numbers of men have updated their risk assessment and are acting accordingly. Economic incentives that once encouraged family formation have weakened in many places. High housing costs, student debt, and career uncertainty make the traditional sequence of marriage and children feel distant for many young adults. When men see these pressures combined with legal systems that carry asymmetric risks, they calculate differently. Rather than taking on multiple layers of obligation, they focus on building personal security first. Savings grow, skills improve, networks form around shared interests rather than shared responsibilities. The stability that results feels more reliable than promises that have proven fragile in the past. Rural areas in many countries illustrate the long term consequences most visibly. Towns that once supported multiple generations through farming, local businesses, and community institutions now face shrinking populations. Schools consolidate or close when student numbers fall below viable levels. Medical services become harder to maintain when the tax base shrinks. Young men who might have stayed to continue family traditions instead move toward urban opportunities or choose independent paths that do not require them to shoulder the full weight of community expectations. The fabric that held these places together frays slowly but steadily. Men who have walked away from the old script often describe a surprising sense of lightness once the decision settles. They no longer carry the mental load of trying to anticipate every need or repair every imbalance. Their days have clearer structure, focused on priorities they chose themselves. Physical health benefits from consistent routines without the interference of constant emotional negotiation. Mental clarity improves when energy is not spent decoding mixed signals or managing unspoken resentments. Many report that relationships with family and friends actually deepen because interactions are no longer strained by underlying pressure to perform a specific role. This clarity extends to financial decisions as well. Men who once stretched budgets to cover dates, gifts, or shared living expenses now allocate resources with precision. Investments in personal development return compound benefits over time. Emergency funds grow, providing real security rather than theoretical stability. Hobbies receive proper attention because money is not constantly redirected toward maintaining appearances. The lifestyle that emerges is often described as simple luxury, not because it involves extravagance, but because it aligns closely with actual needs and desires. Cultural narratives struggle to keep pace with these behavioral changes. Media outlets sometimes portray men walking away as a crisis of masculinity or a failure of character. Commentators suggest solutions that focus on encouraging men to try harder or be better partners without addressing the underlying reasons for withdrawal. These responses miss the central point. Men have already tried the conventional path in large numbers and found it lacking in reciprocity and respect. The withdrawal is a rational response to observed reality rather than a defect in character. In Japan, the herbivore men have become a recognized social category, even if the label carries mixed connotations. Some use it neutrally to describe men with lower interest in aggressive romantic pursuit. Others apply it critically, suggesting a lack of ambition or responsibility. The men themselves often ignore the debate and continue living according to their own standards. They maintain neat appearances, pursue personal interests, and contribute to society through work while keeping their private lives private. Their existence challenges old assumptions about what male adulthood must look like and forces broader conversation about changing incentives. Similar conversations emerge in other countries, though the terminology differs. Terms like voluntary celibacy or MGTOW describe overlapping phenomena where men consciously reduce romantic involvement to protect their well being. The core motivation remains consistent across labels. Men have examined the costs and benefits and decided the traditional bargain no longer justifies the investment. They redirect that investment towards self mastery, financial independence, and personal peace. The results speak for themselves in improved life satisfaction reported in anonymous surveys and in the steady accumulation of personal stability. The intensity of this shift should not be underestimated. When half or more of an entire generation of men in a developed nation chooses to step back from family formation, the downstream effects touch every major institution. Education systems adjust to smaller cohorts. Healthcare infrastructure must scale for aging populations with fewer workers. Pension and social security programs face mathematical pressure that cannot be solved through slogans alone. Political leaders propose various fixes from financial bonuses for new parents to expanded immigration. Yet the core behavioral change among men continues because it is rooted in daily lived experience rather than abstract policy. Women who desire committed partnerships face a more competitive and selective environment. The men who remain open to relationships often set higher standards for mutual respect, emotional stability, and clear communication. Those standards reflect lessons learned from past imbalances. Relationships that do form under these conditions tend to be more intentional and less prone to sudden dissolution. However, the overall pool of men actively seeking traditional roles has shrunk, leaving many women navigating a landscape that feels unfamiliar and sometimes hostile to their expectations. Men who have embraced this new direction rarely express regret. They describe discovering capabilities they did not know they possessed when freed from external scripts. One man might master a musical instrument after years of thinking he lacked talent. Another might build a successful small business focused on a niche interest that brings both income and satisfaction. Others simply enjoy the freedom to travel light, explore new places, and return home without needing to coordinate every detail with another person. The peace they find is practical and sustainable because it depends on their own consistent actions rather than someone else's variable moods. This practical peace stands in contrast to the anxiety that often accompanies unbalanced dynamics. Constant negotiation over roles and responsibilities drains energy that could be used for creation and growth. When that negotiation ends, men often report sharper focus and higher productivity in areas they value. Their health markers improve as stress levels decrease. Sleep becomes restorative rather than fragmented. The body and mind respond positively when treated with the same care a man might once have directed outward exclusively. The global conversation around these changes is still catching up. Some voices frame the trend as temporary or solvable through better messaging. Others acknowledge deeper structural issues in how modern societies organize relationships and responsibilities. Honest examination requires looking at decades of cultural shifts that altered incentives without fully accounting for human nature. Men responded to those altered incentives in predictable ways once the patterns became clear. The withdrawal was not sudden. It was the logical conclusion of consistent experiences repeated across time and place. As societies continue to adapt, new equilibria will form. Some men will maintain complete independence. Others will form selective partnerships based on genuine compatibility and reciprocity. Institutions will evolve to reflect smaller family units and longer individual lifespans. The process will not be smooth or uniform, but it is already underway. The men who walked away early helped define the new boundaries by their absence as much as by their presence. The stories from rural Japan carry particular weight because they show the long arc of these decisions. Villages that thrived 50 years ago now face real extinction as the last residents age without replacement. Schools that once echoed with children's voices stand empty or repurposed. Local festivals continue with smaller crowds and heavier reliance on elderly participants. The emotional reality is complex. There is pride in past accomplishments mixed with sadness over what is fading. Younger men who visit family in these areas sometimes feel the contrast sharply. They see the effort their parents and grandparents invested, and they respect it. At the same time, they recognize that repeating the same pattern under current conditions would likely lead to similar strain without the same social rewards. This recognition drives continued focus on self preservation. Men choose careers or lifestyles that allow sustainability over decades rather than short bursts of intense provision. They build skills that remain valuable regardless of relationship status. They maintain physical and mental health as foundational assets rather than afterthoughts. The approach is deliberate and unapologetic because the alternative has been tested thoroughly by previous generations. In urban environments, the shift appears differently, but the underlying logic remains. Young professionals in high rise apartments invest in home gym equipment or online learning platforms rather than expanding living space for potential families. Social activities center on interest based groups where participation is voluntary and low pressure. Dating, when it occurs, happens with clear boundaries and lower emotional investment. The overall energy that once flowed heavily into relationship maintenance now stays within the individual's control, creating a different kind of abundance. Women navigating this environment sometimes describe feeling invisible or undervalued when their efforts to attract attention yield fewer results than expected. The men who do engage often do so selectively and with less urgency. This change in pace can feel disorienting to those who learn to expect constant pursuit. Adjustment requires recognizing that the old signals no longer carry the same weight. New approaches based on mutual benefit and respect have a better chance of success, but they demand honesty about past imbalances. The economic data continues to track these behavioral changes with increasing precision. Labor force participation among young men shows nuanced shifts, with some sectors experiencing reduced enthusiasm for overtime or high stress roles. Consumer spending patterns reflect more individualized choices rather than family oriented ones. Savings and investment accounts grow more steadily among men who have adopted minimalist principles. These are not catastrophic collapses, but steady recalibrations that compound over time. Men who live this reality often emphasize the importance of pattern recognition in their decision making. They observe how quickly situations can change when legal or social frameworks favor one side. They note the difference between words and consistent actions over months and years. They trust evidence they can verify rather than promises that have proven flexible in the past. This grounded approach protects them from repeating cycles that led to frustration or loss. It also frees mental energy for pursuits that actually build lasting satisfaction. The intensity of the original cultural push against traditional male roles created the conditions for this widespread response. When respect for male sacrifice diminished and risks increased without corresponding benefits, men adjusted their level of participation. The adjustment was not coordinated through organizations in most cases. It happened organically as millions of individuals reached similar conclusions through personal experience. The power of that organic shift lies in its resilience. It cannot be legislated away or shamed into reversal because it is rooted in daily reality. Men walking away represents a fundamental recalibration of priorities based on updated understanding of incentives and outcomes. The herbivore men in Japan were early adopters of this approach. Their examples spread through observation and shared experience. Other nations show parallel developments even when the surface details differ. The common element is the decision to prioritize self well being after decades of evidence suggesting the old contract had become unbalanced. This decision carries real consequences for society at large, but it also brings tangible benefits to the men who make it: greater peace of mind, improved health, financial security under personal control, the freedom to pursue interests without justification. These benefits accumulate quietly but powerfully, shaping individual lives and eventually the broader culture. The story is still being written, but the direction is set by the choices men make every single day. The coming years will reveal how institutions adapt to these realities. Some will resist and face increasing strain. Others will evolve to reflect the new balance between individual autonomy and collective needs. Men who have already walked this path will continue focusing on what they can control while observing the larger shifts with clear eyes. Their example serves as both cautionary tale and practical demonstration of what becomes possible when priorities realign with observable truth. The trends continue to develop, and the personal stories keep adding depth to the larger narrative. Men are building lives that work for them in the current environment, and the results are visible in their steady progress and quiet satisfaction. Society faces the challenge of integrating these changes without denial or panic. The path forward requires honest recognition of root causes rather than surface fixes. The men have shown they are capable of adapting. The question remains how the rest of society will respond to the new reality they helped create. The personal toll of these large scale shifts appears most clearly in the lives of those who have withdrawn even further into solitude. Consider a man in his mid 50s living in a modest apartment on the outskirts of a Japanese city. For decades, he has rarely left his room, relying on his elderly mother for basic needs while the world outside moves at a pace he no longer matches. His days pass in quiet routines of reading, watching screens, or simply sitting with his thoughts. The pressure to conform to rigid workplace hierarchies and social expectations once felt suffocating. Now the silence brings its own weight, yet it also shields him from the exhaustion of constant performance. His mother, now in her late 80s, continues to prepare meals and handle daily affairs with fading strength. She worries about what will happen when she can no longer provide that support. And he senses the same uncertainty, but finds it difficult to bridge the gap back to active engagement. These stories of extended isolation highlight a related layer of the broader withdrawal. When the initial step back from traditional roles meets additional pressures such as bullying in educational settings, undiagnosed challenges with focus, or overwhelming family dynamics, some men retreat further. They stop attending school or work altogether, creating what observers call school refusal that can extend into adulthood. An 11-year-old boy in a coastal region might leave formal classes after repeated conflicts with peers and strict structures. Instead, he spends time fishing with his father or creating content online where he can express himself without judgment. His parents choose to support this path rather than force reintegration, recognizing that rigid conformity sometimes breaks more than it builds. The boy thrives in his own rhythm, learning practical skills and sharing his perspective with others who feel similar disconnection. Families navigate these situations with a mixture of love, frustration, and adaptation. A single mother might publicly share her experiences raising a son who has not worked or studied for several years. She once applied strict discipline, hoping to prepare him for success in a competitive environment. Over time, she softened her approach after seeing how pressure contributed to his distance. Now she hosts discussions and writes openly to reduce the shame surrounding such circumstances. Her efforts connect with other parents facing the same reality, building small networks of mutual support where silence once prevailed. These mothers often carry the heaviest daily load, managing household needs while watching their adult children grapple with motivation and reconnection. The economic machinery of society adjusts unevenly to these patterns. Companies that once focused production on items for growing families now redirect resources toward products for older adults. Manufacturers shift from infant supplies to items supporting mobility and daily care for the elderly. Beverage producers develop specialized drinks suited to changing nutritional needs in later life. Funeral services evolve with options for simpler or more individualized arrangements as traditional family structures loosen. These business pivots reflect a practical response to measurable changes in population composition and spending habits. The workforce itself shows gaps in sectors requiring consistent physical presence or long term commitment. Training programs aimed at reintegrating withdrawn individuals see mixed results, with many participants losing momentum after initial progress because the underlying sense of purpose remains elusive. Governments track these developments through nationwide studies that reveal hundreds of thousands of people living in varying degrees of disconnection across age groups. The numbers include adults well into their 40s and 50s who depend on aging parents for housing and support. This creates what some describe as an 80-50 dynamic where parents in their 80s care for children in their 50s. The strain compounds when those parents face health declines of their own. Medical facilities and community services stretch thinner as the ratio of caregivers to those needing care tilts unfavorably. Policy responses include expanded training initiatives and alternative education models that emphasize flexibility over uniformity. Some programs use creative outlets such as collaborative art projects, where participants build and then dismantle pieces as a way to process past experiences and rebuild confidence. Artistic expression offers one pathway out of prolonged isolation for those ready to take it. A former withdrawn individual might create installations that recreate the physical barriers of his old living space, using the work to symbolize breaking through invisible walls. He collaborates with others in similar situations, turning shared trauma into collective creation. The process involves destruction and reconstruction, mirroring the internal work of moving from detachment back toward connection. These projects challenge the surrounding culture to view withdrawal not merely as failure, but as a response to environments that demand conformity at the expense of individual fit. They invite conversation about mental health without the heavy stigma that once kept families silent. The demographic arithmetic grows more pressing each year. Annual population losses reach record levels, with births falling to numbers not seen in over a century, while deaths climb. Fertility rates remain among the lowest globally, creating a shrinking cohort of young adults entering the workforce. This imbalance pressures pension systems, healthcare infrastructure, and economic productivity. Leaders describe the situation as a quiet emergency requiring sustained attention. Incentives for larger families have been introduced through financial support and awareness campaigns. Yet the response stays modest because deeper factors influence personal choices. High living expenses, demanding work schedules, and uncertainty about long term stability weigh heavily on decisions about partnership and children. Immigration enters the discussion as one potential buffer, bringing record numbers of foreign residents to fill labor gaps. These individuals now represent a small but growing percentage of the population. Cultural integration remains complex, and public debate continues about the scale and pace that would preserve social cohesion. The core challenge persists because native birth rates have not rebounded despite various measures. The pattern suggests that economic and social incentives alone do not fully address the motivational shift occurring at the individual level. Men who maintain a measured distance from traditional expectations often cite the cumulative effect of long work hours and hierarchical structures that leave little room for personal recovery. They observe colleagues sacrificing family time for career advancement only to face health consequences or relational strain. Rather than follow the same trajectory, many opt for roles that allow better balance even if advancement slows. They invest energy in personal maintenance through consistent physical activity or skill development that serves their own goals. This selective engagement preserves their capacity over decades rather than burning it out in pursuit of status that may not deliver proportional rewards. The contrast between urban density and personal disconnection creates a particular tension. In crowded cities where millions live in close proximity, individuals can still experience profound solitude. Delivery services and digital platforms allow basic needs to be met without face to face interaction. This convenience enables deeper withdrawal for those already inclined toward it. At the same time, it highlights how modern infrastructure can both connect and isolate depending on how it is used. People order essentials online, communicate through screens, and curate their environments to minimize unwanted contact. The result is a society that functions efficiently on the surface while certain segments drift further from communal rhythms. Stories of solitary endings underscore the human cost when disconnection extends unchecked. An older man living alone might pass away in his residence, with days or weeks passing before discovery. Neighbors notice unusual odors or missed routines, and authorities respond to perform welfare checks. Cleanup services have emerged to handle such situations professionally, reflecting a pragmatic adaptation to rising numbers of individuals living without close family networks. These incidents prompt a reflection on the importance of maintaining some level of community awareness, even as lifestyles become more independent. Younger generations absorb these observations and adjust their own paths accordingly. They see the physical and emotional wear on previous cohorts and choose routes that prioritize sustainability. Education systems face their own challenges, with students opting out of traditional schooling due to bullying or mismatch with rigid expectations. Alternative programs that incorporate practical activities, creative expression, or flexible scheduling show promise in keeping more individuals connected to learning without forcing conformity. Success stories from these settings demonstrate that tailored approaches can prevent full withdrawal and build skills for independent living. The global dimension becomes apparent when similar patterns of disconnection appear in other developed nations. Competitive environments that emphasize productivity and uniformity create parallel pressures regardless of cultural specifics. Individuals in various countries report feeling out of place in systems that reward narrow definitions of success. Technology enables both connection and retreat, allowing people to maintain minimal external engagement while meeting basic requirements. The spread of these behaviors suggests underlying issues in how modern societies structure work, education, and social expectations. Women who raise concerns about the difficulty of forming stable partnerships often point to the same systemic factors. They describe balancing career demands with personal desires in environments where support for family life remains limited. The choice between professional progression and child rearing feels stark when wages stagnate relative to living costs and workplace cultures favor long hours. Some adapt by delaying major life decisions, while others seek partners who share a more balanced outlook. The overall environment rewards careful calculation over impulsive commitment. Men navigating these realities focus on building resilience through habits that compound positively over time. They maintain physical conditioning not for external validation, but for personal capability and longevity. Financial discipline becomes a form of self protection, with resources directed toward assets that grow independently rather than shared obligations that carry uncertainty. Intellectual pursuits provide mental stimulation without the drama of mismatched expectations. The lifestyle that emerges emphasizes self reliance because observable outcomes have taught the value of controlling what one can influence directly. This self reliance does not equate to total separation from society. Many men continue contributing through their work and civic participation while maintaining clear personal boundaries. They engage selectively in social activities that align with genuine interests rather than obligatory performances. Friendships form around shared activities or values rather than romantic or familial pressure. The distinction between necessary involvement and optional entanglement becomes sharper with experience. Cultural products such as literature, film, and digital media increasingly reflect these themes of individual navigation in complex systems. Characters who question endless competition or rigid roles resonate with audiences facing similar dilemmas. Narratives explore the tension between personal authenticity and societal demands, offering indirect commentary on the choices people make to preserve their well being. These stories circulate widely, shaping perceptions and normalizing discussions that once stayed private. The long term outlook involves ongoing adaptation rather than sudden reversal. Population structures will continue shifting toward larger proportions of older adults for the foreseeable future. Economic models will evolve to accommodate smaller working age groups through automation, efficiency gains, and Redefine productivity metrics. Social services will need innovation to support varied living arrangements, including extended single adulthood and non traditional households. The process requires honest assessment of what worked in previous eras and what no longer fits current realities. Individuals who have already recalibrated their priorities often report greater consistency in their daily experience. Mornings begin with routines chosen for personal benefit rather than external approval. Evenings allow reflection without the residue of unresolved conflicts. Energy levels stabilize when chronic stressors from unbalanced dynamics are minimized. These improvements reinforce the decision to maintain distance from paths that previously led to depletion. The intensity of demographic change demands attention from all levels of society. Leaders propose multifaceted strategies that combine economic adjustments with cultural reevaluation. Success will depend on addressing root motivations rather than applying temporary patches. Men who have stepped back have demonstrated their capacity to thrive under self directed frameworks. Their example encourages broader consideration of how incentives can be realigned to support sustainable participation without coercion. Families remain central even as their forms diversify. Parents who adapt their expectations to match their children's realities often find improved communication and reduce conflict. Adult children who feel understood are sometimes more willing to maintain connection on terms that respect their boundaries. This mutual adjustment creates space for new kinds of intergenerational support that do not rely on traditional scripts. The artistic and therapeutic approaches emerging from withdrawal experiences offer valuable insights. Collaborative projects that allow expression of past difficulties help participants process emotions constructively. Public exhibitions challenge viewers to empathize with perspectives outside mainstream narratives. These efforts contribute to reducing stigma and opening pathways for those seeking gradual reintegration. Economic data continues to reflect the cumulative impact of individual choices. Sectors serving independent adults show steady demand, while those tied to large family units adjust their scale. Labor markets experience tightness in care related fields as demographic imbalances persist. Innovation focuses on technologies that extend independence for older populations and support efficiency for smaller workforces. Men who embody the shift towards self focus often describe it as reclaiming authority over their own narrative. They set standards for how they spend their time and resources based on direct results rather than promised outcomes. This clarity reduces vulnerability to manipulation through guilt or social pressure. It also opens capacity for contributions that feel voluntary and meaningful rather than obligatory. The broader culture grapples with integrating these changes while preserving essential functions. Discussions about work life balance, mental well being, and flexible structures gain traction as more people recognize the limits of previous models. Educational reforms experiment with approaches that value diverse learning styles and practical competencies. Policy experiments test incentives that respect individual agency while encouraging positive societal outcomes. Stories from those who have moved through periods of disconnection back towards selective engagement highlight the possibility of recovery when conditions align. Support networks that emphasize patience and customization rather than rapid conformity show higher retention rates. Individuals who regain momentum often credit environments that allowed them to rebuild at their own pace without judgment. The global conversation benefits from Japan's experience as an advanced case study. Other nations observe the patterns of population adjustment and social withdrawal to anticipate their own trajectories. Lessons include the importance of early intervention for school refusal, the value of reducing stigma around mental health, and the need for economic policies that make family formation feasible for those who desire it. Men walking this path continue to prioritize foundational elements that sustain long term peace. They cultivate habits of discipline in areas under their control. They seek knowledge that expands their options without tying them to unstable dependencies. They maintain awareness of larger trends while focusing energy on immediate realities. This grounded approach serves them well as societies navigate uncertain transitions. The coming decades will test the resilience of institutions built on assumptions of continuous growth and traditional family units. Adaptation will require creativity and willingness to examine what truly motivates human behavior in modern contexts. Men who have already made their adjustments offer living proof that self directed living can produce stability and satisfaction, even amid larger disruptions. This progression reveals the multifaceted nature of the changes underway. From individual rooms of quiet reflection to national statistics of population movement, the picture emerges through countless personal calculations, adding to a collective shift. The intensity remains because the underlying issues touch core aspects of identity, responsibility, and purpose. Yet within that intensity lies the potential for new equilibria where individuals and societies find sustainable ways forward. The narrative of withdrawal and recalibration continues to unfold with real consequences and real opportunities. Men who choose focus on their own development contribute to a different kind of strength, one rooted in clarity and self mastery. Society as a whole must respond with equal honesty if it hopes to integrate these realities productively. The weight of these withdrawals lands heaviest on the families left holding the pieces together. An 88-year-old mother wakes each morning in a small house on the edge of a Japanese city and prepares breakfast for her 54-year-old son, who has spent most of his adult life in the same bedroom. She moves more carefully now, her steps slower, her hands less steady, yet she continues because the alternative feels unbearable. Her son speaks of feeling that he does not quite belong in the world outside, that even when present, he senses he is not fully himself. He worries about her declining health and the day when she will no longer be there to bridge the gap between his room and the larger society. The silence between them carries years of unspoken concern, love mixed with helplessness, and the slow realization that the rigid paths once offered by school and work did not fit everyone equally. This dynamic repeats in households across the country where adult children remain dependent long past the age when previous generations had established independent lives. Parents in their late 70s or 80s manage daily care for sons and daughters in their 40s and 50s who stepped away from conventional expectations after encountering bullying, academic pressure, or the crushing weight of economic uncertainty following major recessions. The parents often shoulder both financial and emotional loads while their own strength fades. They watch their savings dwindle and their energy diminish, all while trying to maintain some sense of normalcy in homes that have become quiet fortresses against the outside world. The guilt they carry is real because society still whispers that proper parenting should produce productive adults who marry, work steadily, and raise the next generation. Younger cases show the pattern beginning even earlier. An 11-year-old boy named Yutaka decides one day that the structured classroom environment no longer works for him after facing repeated bullying and incidents that left him feeling unsafe. Instead of forcing daily attendance, his parents support an alternative where he learns through practical activities like fishing and creates online content that reaches other children struggling with similar feelings. He speaks openly about disillusionment with a system that seems to value conformity over individual well being. His videos address heavy topics like bullying and its consequences, offering a voice to those who feel invisible in traditional settings. The parents recognize that pushing too hard risks pushing him further away, so they choose patience and customization, allowing him space to develop at his own pace while still guiding him toward basic skills. These school refusers, numbering in the hundreds of thousands, represent an early warning sign of deeper mismatches between individual temperaments and societal demands. Rigid educational structures that emphasize group harmony, competition, and uniform performance leave some students feeling broken rather than built up. When bullying compounds the pressure, or when undiagnosed challenges with attention and focus go unaddressed for years, the logical response for many is to retreat. Alternative learning centers have emerged to fill the gap, places where children can engage with material through creative projects, physical activities, and flexible schedules. In these settings, instructors emphasize rebuilding confidence before demanding reintegration. Many participants eventually return to mainstream paths, but the process takes time and requires acknowledging that not every child thrives under the same conditions. The economic consequences ripple outward from these individual family struggles. Industries once centered on supporting young families have shifted their focus dramatically. Companies that manufactured products for infants and children now produce items designed for elderly care because the demand has inverted. Adult incontinence products outsell baby diapers in many categories as the population ages and the number of newborns declines. Beverage manufacturers develop specialized teas and nutritional drinks formulated for older digestive systems and changing nutritional requirements. Funeral services adapt to smaller family gatherings and more individualized arrangements, with some groups promoting alternatives like scattering ashes at sea or simple memorial events that reflect the reality of fewer relatives available to participate. This industrial reorientation is not a minor adjustment. It reflects a fundamental change in what society consumes and values when the balance between young and old tilts heavily. Businesses that fail to pivot risk obsolescence, while those that anticipate the needs of an aging majority find new growth. The labor market shows parallel strains with shortages in caregiving professions where the physical and emotional demands are high and the compensation often fails to match the responsibility. Training initiatives attempt to attract more workers into these fields, but face challenges when potential candidates see the workload and choose other directions that offer better balance or less direct exposure to human suffering on a daily scale. Government responses include nationwide studies to map the extent of social disconnection and targeted programs aimed at gradual reintegration. One initiative brings small groups of withdrawn individuals together for basic skill building sessions covering practical tasks like using spreadsheet software, handling simple correspondence, or practicing public speaking in low pressure environments. Success rates vary, with many participants losing momentum after initial enthusiasm because the internal barriers remain strong. Those who persist often credit the slow pace and absence of judgment for allowing them to rebuild without the fear of immediate failure. The programs acknowledge that forcing rapid return to full participation can backfire, creating more resistance rather than progress. Artistic projects provide another avenue for processing the experiences of withdrawal. Former isolated individuals collaborate on installations that recreate the physical and emotional barriers they once faced. One artist builds a replica of the door to his old room as a central piece, inviting viewers to confront the symbolism of separation and reconnection. Participants smash models representing family homes or past traumas and then carefully reconstruct them, turning destruction into deliberate rebuilding. These works challenge the broader culture to move beyond simple labels of laziness or failure and instead consider the complex interplay of personal temperament, societal expectations, and unmet needs for understanding. Exhibitions draw attention from those inside and outside the experience, fostering conversations that reduce stigma and highlight the humanity behind the statistics. The demographic mathematics underlying these stories grows increasingly unforgiving. Annual population declines reach levels not seen in modern records, with births falling to numbers unseen for well over a century, while deaths set new highs. The workforce shrinks as fewer young adults enter employment and more individuals reach retirement age. Healthcare systems face rising demand from an expanding elderly population, while the number of contributors to support those systems diminishes. Political leaders describe the situation as a quiet emergency requiring urgent but sustained action. Campaigns encourage marriage and family formation through digital matching tools and financial incentives. Yet the response remains limited because the deeper barriers involve trust, economic security, and alignment between personal desires and practical realities. Immigration offers a partial counterbalance with foreign residents reaching record numbers, though still representing a small fraction of the total population. These individuals fill essential roles in labor intensive sectors and contribute to local economies in visible ways, such as staffing cafes and service businesses. Integration efforts emphasize selective approaches that prioritize those who bring skills or willingness to adapt to existing cultural frameworks. Public discussion continues about the appropriate scale and pace, balancing labor needs against concerns about preserving social cohesion and national identity. The strategy provides short term relief, but does not address the root factors influencing native birth and participation rates. Men who have chosen paths of greater independence often point to the cumulative impact of work cultures that demand total devotion with little room for personal recovery or family involvement. Long hours in hierarchical environments leave limited energy for building relationships or raising children. They observe how previous generations accepted these conditions as normal only to face health consequences or relational distance. In response, many select career tracks or lifestyle arrangements that allow sustainability across decades rather than short term maximization of status or income. They invest in physical conditioning and skill development that enhance their own capabilities and options without tying their worth to external validation or provision roles that carry high personal cost. The contrast between dense urban living and individual disconnection creates unique tensions. Cities with millions of residents still allow profound solitude through technology and service infrastructure that minimizes necessary contact. Delivery systems and digital platforms handle essentials without requiring face to face interaction, enabling those inclined toward retreat to maintain basic functions while limiting broader engagement. This convenience serves practical needs, but also highlights how modern systems can facilitate isolation when personal motivation for connection weakens. People curate their daily existence around screens and controlled environments, reducing exposure to the unpredictable elements of social life that once built resilience through necessity. Incidents of solitary passing illustrate the outer limits of this disconnection. Older individuals living alone may go unnoticed for extended periods until neighbors detect unusual signs or authorities perform checks. Specialized cleaning services have developed to handle these situations with professionalism and discretion, reflecting a pragmatic societal response to rising occurrences. These events prompt reflection on the importance of maintaining minimal community awareness and support networks even as lifestyles grow more self contained. Families and neighbors who once lived in closer interdependence now navigate greater distances, both physical and emotional. The younger generation absorbs these realities and shapes its expectations accordingly. They witness the physical and mental toll on parents and grandparents who carried heavy loads without adequate recognition or recovery time. In response, they prioritize arrangements that emphasize long term well being over immediate performance metrics. Educational alternatives that incorporate hands on learning and respect for different paces show potential in retaining more individuals within productive frameworks. Success depends on early identification of struggles and willingness to adapt structures rather than demanding that every person conform to a single mold. Similar patterns of disconnection appear in other advanced economies, though expressed through local cultural lenses. Competitive pressures, high living costs, and shifting social norms create parallel challenges for maintaining motivation toward traditional milestones. Technology enables both broader awareness of global opportunities and easier retreat into personalized spaces. The spread of these behaviors points to structural questions about how contemporary societies organize work, education, and expectations around contribution and belonging. Women raising concerns about partnership and family formation often cite the same underlying pressures of career demands, financial strain, and limited support for balancing multiple roles. They describe environments where professional advancement competes directly with desires for stable relationships and children. The calculations involved in timing major life decisions grow more complex when economic security feels precarious and social support for family life remains uneven. Some delay commitments while seeking partners who demonstrate willingness to share loads equitably. The overall environment encourages deliberate evaluation rather than rushed choices. Men who have recalibrated their approach frequently describe the process as reclaiming control over their narrative. After years of navigating mismatched expectations, they establish standards for time and resource allocation based on tangible outcomes rather than abstract obligations. This shift reduces exposure to situations where efforts yield inconsistent returns or hidden risks. It also creates capacity for pursuits that generate direct satisfaction and compound benefits over time. Physical health, financial discipline, and intellectual growth become priorities because they deliver reliable improvements without depending on variable external factors. Cultural expressions in media and creative works increasingly reflect these themes of individual navigation amid complex systems. Characters who question endless hierarchies or seek authentic paths resonate with audiences facing similar tensions. Narratives explore the balance between personal truth and collective demands, providing indirect exploration of the choices people make to protect their peace. These stories circulate widely and contribute to normalizing discussions that were once confined to private circles. The long arc of adaptation will involve institutions evolving to match changing population structures and behavioral patterns. Economic models will incorporate smaller working cohorts through technological efficiency and redefine measures of productivity. Social services will innovate to support diverse living arrangements, including extended periods of single adulthood and non standard households. The transition requires clear assessment of historical assumptions versus current realities rather than attempts to restore previous conditions through willpower alone. Individuals who have stabilized their lives through self directed frameworks often note improvements in daily consistency. Routines align with personal needs rather than external calendars. Energy sustains without the drain of unresolved tensions. These gains reinforce the value of maintaining boundaries that protect core well being. The approach does not eliminate all challenges, but places them within a framework of personal ownership and manageable scope. Broader cultural conversations benefit from examining advanced examples like Japan's experience with demographic adjustment and social disconnection. Other nations can observe the sequence of population shifts, institutional strains, and individual responses to anticipate their own paths. Key insights include the value of reducing stigma around mental health struggles, the effectiveness of patient and customized support for reintegration, and the necessity of addressing economic factors that influence family decisions at the foundational level. Men continuing along paths of focused self development demonstrate that strength can manifest through clarity and sustained discipline rather than solely through outward provision. They cultivate habits that build resilience across changing circumstances. They pursue knowledge that expands options while avoiding dependencies that introduce unnecessary vulnerability. They observe larger trends with awareness, but direct primary energy toward immediate controllable elements. This practical orientation serves them effectively as societies manage transitions that test established frameworks. The coming period will challenge systems constructed around assumptions of steady expansion and uniform participation. Creative responses and honest reevaluation will determine how well new equilibria form. Men who have already adjusted their priorities provide concrete examples of self mastery yielding stability amid uncertainty. Their lived experiences encourage wider reflection on aligning incentives with observable human motivations rather than idealized models. This layer of the narrative reveals the human texture beneath the aggregate numbers. From bedrooms where daily existence narrows to essential routines, through family homes carrying multi generational burdens, to industries reshaping their output for shifting demographics, the changes accumulate through countless personal decisions. The intensity arises because these shifts touch fundamental questions of belonging, purpose, and sustainability. Within that intensity exists space for renewed understanding and adaptive structures that respect individual differences while preserving collective functions. The story of disconnection and recalibration advances through real human costs and incremental adaptations. Families negotiate new forms of support, economies redirect resources, and individuals discover capacities for endurance and growth when given appropriate conditions. Society confronts the task of integrating these developments with honesty about root dynamics rather than surface level interventions. The men involved continue demonstrating the possibility of constructing meaningful lives on foundations of self awareness and deliberate choice. What we have examined here is not a fleeting trend or a minor cultural footnote. It is a profound recalibration happening in real time across nations and generations. Men have observed decades of shifting expectations, legal imbalances, cultural messaging that painted their natural strengths as problems, and social dynamics that demanded endless sacrifice with diminishing returns. In response, they have stepped back, redirected their energy towards self preservation, personal development, and peace of mind. This movement, visible first and most clearly in places like Japan, with its herbivore men and growing numbers of disconnected individuals, now echoes in different forms around the world. The demographic consequences, the strain on families, the economic pivots, and the quiet personal victories all tell the same underlying story. Men are no longer willing to shoulder unbalanced loads without genuine respect and reciprocity. They have learned to value their own time, resources, and well being after seeing the alternative play out repeatedly. The intensity of this shift comes from its quiet nature. There are no loud rallies or dramatic declarations in most cases. Instead, there are millions of individual decisions made after careful reflection on lived experience. Men choose simpler routines that restore rather than deplete them. They build financial security under their own control. They pursue interests that bring direct satisfaction without needing constant external approval. They set firm boundaries against dynamics that previously led to frustration or loss. This is not retreat into nothingness. It is deliberate movement toward clarity and strength rooted in observable reality. Society may feel the absence in birth rates, workforce participation, and traditional family structures, yet the men involved often report greater stability and purpose once the old pressures subside. The pattern recognition that guided them away from unbalanced arrangements now protects their future. As these changes continue to unfold, entire systems built on previous assumptions face necessary adaptation. Economies adjust to smaller cohorts of young workers and larger groups of older citizens. Institutions experiment with flexible models that respect diverse paths rather than demanding uniform conformity. Families navigate new forms of connection that honor individual boundaries while still offering support. The process is neither quick nor painless, but it is driven by realities that cannot be wished away. Men who have walked this path demonstrate that self focus is not selfishness when it restores balance and prevents burnout. They show that peace can be found in minimalist living, consistent discipline, and the freedom to direct energy where it actually yields results. Their example challenges everyone to examine incentives honestly rather than cling to narratives that no longer match daily experience. If you have stayed with this discussion to the end, you now see the depth and the direction of what is happening. Men walking away is reshaping societies in ways that will echo for generations. It forces a reckoning with decades of cultural and legal shifts that altered the basic contract between men, women, and broader society. The humility required to address root causes remains in short supply in many circles, yet the observable outcomes continue to mount. Rural areas empty, caregiving burdens grow heavier on fewer shoulders, industries redirect toward aging populations, and individuals recalibrate their expectations for what constitutes a worthwhile life. Through it all, the men who have chosen this path keep moving forward on their own terms, building lives that align with their nature rather than fighting against it. Shout out to the 2 Hour Gang. Now, I want to hear from you. What did you think about what was discussed here today? Do you agree with the patterns we have examined and the conclusions drawn from real world outcomes? Leave a comment on the video and share your thoughts honestly. Tell me whether you see similar shifts in your own community or country. Tell me if you believe society can adapt in healthy ways or whether the consequences will run deeper than most are willing to admit. Your perspective matters because this conversation is larger than any single voice. Honest comments help all of us understand the full picture and push the discussion forward with clarity rather than noise. Like the video if you like it. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you like the video, share the video. And just remember that all roads lead to MWA, men walking away, and cheers.
Nothing says you care like crypto. Nothing can compare. Nothing says you care like crypto. Oh, nothing can compare to crypto.